Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series in Monterey. This is a very special one, and I have a very special person to ask many questions about best practices around corporate venturing. Erin, welcome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to actually have this conversation in person. So thank you.
I think in person is so much better.
It is.
So first, Erin, maybe you could introduce yourself and maybe your journey into corporate venturing.
Sure. So my journey is a little bit different, I think, than most people that do this. I like to say that my career has taken some very hard right and left turns over the
Okay.
last 20 plus years. I actually started my career in the military. So I went to a military academy for college, and then after I graduated, I was an artillery officer in the U.S. Army for about 6 years, active duty. After my second deployment to Iraq, I decided to get out and go to the civilian side and jumped right into brand management at Kraft Foods, which was an interesting transition. But I spent the next decade or so working really on the operator side of running P&L businesses, doing a variety of roles: marketing, brand management, global innovation, strategy, M&A integration, in global CPG, food and beverage company. And then after I went to graduate school, I transitioned a little bit happenstance into corporate ventures. SC Johnson was building a venture team. And so they reached out and said, hey, we want someone that has a marketing background, but also has done some deal work. And my role at that time was a commercial integration lead for a couple of deals that we had made when I worked in canned foods. So I remember they sent me the job description and I said, is this a real job? This sounds amazing. And I had been, aware of more of, I would call it like inorganic growth means when I was in grad school at University of Chicago. I took an M&A strategy course that I really loved and said, oh, how do I get into that with more of an operator type background? So I moved into corporate VC without having any really, I would say, investing background. So I know a lot of people that come into CVC come from venture capital firms or investment banking. So they have really strong deal experience. I didn't have that, but I had, the operator experience. So I was at SC Johnson for a few years where I got great mentorship and learned a lot about deal making, deal structures, how to grow through venturing, and how to kind of access this new route of innovation versus just doing everything internally, which I found really exciting. And so I was there for a few years, and then I led Tyson Ventures, which is the fund at Tyson Foods. And then Cargill called and said, "Hey, we're building this corporate venture capital function. Would you like to come do this here?" And so I've been there for a little over 3 years now. So we've built the team out, built the portfolio, have a great ventures board. So I've really kind of built the function at that organization for the last few years. And so that's where I am today.
I have so many double-click questions to ask. Whether it's mentorship or your military background or the fact that you could start from scratch with all the best practices you learned. But let's start with your background.
Sure.
You have a military background. I think you went to West Point.
I did.
Maybe you can share about what it is that you've learned during that time that you are using today in corporate venturing.
That's a great question. I feel like what's so exciting about CVC is that it varies so much from organization to organization. It really depends on what the organization's goals are, what you're trying to deliver, and then the structure you can build to help deliver that. I'm the kind of person that really thrives in environments where there's not a lot of structure. I crave chaos to some extent and
Wow.
try to, create order. So I would say that's a question I get all the time. Like, wait, you have a bachelor's degree in law and nuclear engineering? Like, what are you
Oh, I
doing
saw that.
here? Right. But I think, the experiences that I got, especially in the military and especially in those combat deployments, where you're thrown into situations at really a moment's notice and you have to trust your training, you have to trust your instincts, and you have to build a really great team around you. So, despite the fact that you're an officer and people should listen to you, you still need to build great relationships. People need to know that they can trust you. They need to know that you're going to make the right decisions, especially in really, really stressful times. And I think the idea of accountability and knowing that you're going to have to be able to live with the consequences or answer for those choices that you make is something that I think in the business world is a little bit lacking at times. And so for me, that's been, I think, a differentiator and something that's been really empowering is that if I have the conviction to make a decision, I'm aware of the potential consequences and I'm willing to take that accountability. So having, the ability to make decisions in difficult situations and then live with the consequences, but also not eroding the trust of the people around you is something that's really, really important. And I think perspective, right? Perspective is always just incredibly important. I was talking to the CEO of Siemens last night, and I know they have a big,
Barbara.
yes, they have a big military yeah, and government business. And I was just chatting with her a little bit about how neat it is that they actually recruit quite a bit from the military. And I said it's a hard transition when you're moving from, being a leader of people. When I was 22 years old, I mean, I was a platoon leader. I had 40 men that I was responsible for on a day-to-day basis. That can be a very big responsibility, but then transitioning to being an individual contributor and finding your place is, it can be a hard transition. But I think the perspective that it gives you in situations where, people are panicking, saying, oh my gosh, we're not going to get, this product to a customer in time, or our launch is delayed because this thing out of our control happened. I'm like, all right, take a breath, calm down. Like, we can figure it out. So I think having that perspective and the ability to zoom out and say, okay, what really are the consequences of this? You know, no one's really going to get hurt here. You're going to sleep in your own bed tonight. Like, we can figure this out.
Yep.
I think being able to have like that perspective and that calmness that being in much more stressful situation provides has been very advantageous in my career.
There's so much to double click, but I love the part about trust, but I also like the part about training and processes and trusting what you've built together as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And venture capital is probably even more what you've described in corporations, where a lot of people think there's a lot of luck. But actually, a lot is about training, doing the right things day after day. Can you talk a little bit about what you've discovered during venture capital?
Absolutely. So it's interesting at CVCs, I think that there's a much higher bar, even for performance or the number of portfolio companies that actually deliver value versus a traditional VC. So I think upfront, there's a lot more scrutiny put on what's the ultimate strategic value that we're trying to derive from this investment. Obviously, we have financial return targets. So when people say, are you strategic or financial? I'm like, strategic, but we have to deliver financial value as well. Right. Part of that is the cash on cash return on the investment. But then when you stack the strategic value on that, is there incremental revenue? Is there new market access? Is there cost avoidance? Like, what are all those things that you're adding real value for your organization? Thinking about that, and like you said, having processes by which you evaluate, first of all, what is this going to deliver strategically? Are we resourced to actually deliver against that strategic value, which I think had become one of the bigger challenges, especially in the current market.
Yep.
So, when I think about, like you said, processes and just having the rigor really upfront to say, okay, is this something we believe in? Are we willing to be a good partner here? And how do we do that is really critical to lay the groundwork for success. But execution, right, always has its challenges.
Yeah. Now, something you mentioned is you had a class about M&A, corporate development, and some people might think that class, maybe 6 months or something, was not very influential, but you mentioned it. So how helpful is it to take some type of training, even if it's not a 3 years long training? How much of that was helpful to you? Because maybe the audience would want to know, oh, maybe this is useful to do a little training somewhere and expose myself.
Sure. So that course specifically at Booth, it was actually an M&A strategy course.
Okay.
And so it was more about thinking about how your company wants to grow inorganically and then looking for opportunities to do that and thinking at a very high, like macro level,
Okay.
how does this contribute to growth versus like the financial workings of, how do you do a DCF analysis? How do you, actually dig into the financials and the data? It was more higher level. Okay, if this is your long-term strategic objective, what are you looking for? How do you determine fit? How do you evaluate the management team? How do you evaluate cultural fit with your organization? So all of those, I would say, higher level strategic things were really intriguing and interesting to me. I mean, I'm less about like doing the spreadsheets. I mean, I can do that work, but I have a team that's really good at that. It's my job to say, okay, at a high level, how are we trying to construct a portfolio that's going to deliver on the growth objectives that the organization has? How are we investing in enabling technologies? So it's, again, staying like very high level and taking a macro view of what's happening externally, what we want to do internally, and really matching those things up. That got me excited.
Very nice. Now, you also talked about mentorship. Can you talk about the value of mentorship and how it has helped you? I'm sure you're also a mentor of others, so can you talk a little bit about mentorship?
Yeah. I think mentorship is just so key, both formal and informal. I think there's a bit of a misconception when people are like, well, I have to have a mentor. So a lot of and I've seen this happen at many organizations where I've worked, they try to set up formal mentorship programs and match you with
A bit forced.
executive. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And um, sometimes it's not, it's more of like a tactical execution on a program that's been developed versus looking for things organically. And I personally have found more success from mentors that I found organically. So through networking, former bosses that I've had, leaders at organizations where I've worked that I've found some especially inspiring or interesting about how they do what they do. Building a relationship and getting to learn from those people versus saying, well, I'm going to sit down and talk to you about this problem I have and get your advice. It's more about building rapport, building the trust, right, that we talked about earlier. And I think a lot of those, to me, most valuable mentorship experiences have and continue to happen through just building close relationships with people that I admire and that I want to some extent emulate as I continue my career. And then I like to do that for other people as well. You know, I think just you're a great example, right? You're an informal mentor to me. You probably don't know that, but
I don't know that.
I think the relationship that we've been able to build through GCV, the work that I've seen you do out in the community and the environment, like, is a great example for how to build trust, how to build a community, how to get value out of what you're doing. And so I think everybody always needs to think about, one, what's the value it can provide? So even in those relationships where you're being mentored, I always think about what is it obviously that I want from this person, but what can I offer them as well? What value can I bring to the table? Because I think really importantly in mentorship relationships, it can't always be a get for the person that's being mentored. I think it has to be a mutual give.
That
So
is a golden nugget.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It really is. So instead of approaching mentorship as what can I gain from this person, that's part of the equation. The other part of the equation is what value am I bringing them? What perspective am I bringing them? I have quarterly meetings with my CEO. He was the original chair of the venture board in his previous role. I'm running our protein and salt business. So he has become, just a fantastic mentor to me, but it's grown organically. I still meet with him quarterly, and I always say, what is it? How can I help you? What is it that you want to learn from me that can be helpful in the role you have now? And, he says, well, I'm not as close to maybe the external ecosystem or what innovation's happening out there. Like, what do you find exciting? What are the trends in venture capital right now? What do we need to be thinking about? And even those tiny little nuggets of information from, the smaller investments we're making help inform his overall perspective of the market, the business. He's like, this is really helpful because I don't get much of a view externally, but talking to you gives me a little bit of, that flavor that I want to keep connection to. So I think just always keeping in mind like what the value is, not just that you're getting, but that you're bringing is really important.
It's wonderful. I love it. Let's talk about something you just mentioned, which is community, especially GCV.
Sure.
We're here in Monterey when they have their annual event, which is a great place with 800 CVC meeting.
It's
Can you
gotten
talk?
so big now, right?
It's so
There's
big,
so
right?
many people here. Yeah.
Can you talk about, especially for corporations who are listening in the audience, who may not understand the value of community for corporate VC? Why does it matter to have this community?
So I can say why I think it matters. Obviously, I think
Yes.
everyone will have a different perspective, but at least for me, now that I've done various venturing roles at different organizations, I'm very aware of the fact that CVC looks different depending on where you are. So you have to think about, again, matching up what the organization's needs are, what you can deliver, what's your mandate, and then how you're executing against that. So a process or a format that might work for one organization, depending on what their mandate and goals are, may not be able to lift and shift to another organization. So the ability to have community where you can have conversations with people and say, hey, this is a problem I'm having, or this is how I structured this, but it's not delivering the results that I wanted. How do you think about this? How do you set metrics for performance for your fund? How do you staff? How do you think about succession planning? How do you communicate with your venture board? So honestly, just that information exchange, that knowledge exchange has been really, really valuable for me personally, as I've, tackled thinking about what the right structure and process is for each of the organizations where I've been. And then also, I think just staying on top of like what's happening in, the CVC world, so to speak, hearing that people share the same challenges or if they're having successes, like how they thought about that and structured that. And then I think just the support you get from other people who are kind of living this same life, so to speak. Like, oh, you just went through a CEO transition. How's that going? How have you handled that? How has it changed your structure? How are you living with that now? Oh, you have portfolio companies that are no longer strategically relevant. What's your plan with those? How are you managing that? So I think being able to kind of share that on a professional level. And then I also think on a personal level, it's really important because, if I know someone's maybe, having a personal issue or their team's getting restructured, which can be a very like emotionally stressful thing to go through. Just being able to reach out to people and say, hey, how are you doing? Right. Or them to reach out and say, I'd really love to be able to talk to you about this. That support system, I think, is just, it's very important. And that's part of building a network. I mean, I don't think that, well, not everyone here is going to do this forever. So being able to build a network and understanding, kind of what's going on at other companies, how you can maybe leverage your experience you get here into other roles you want to do. I think that's all incredibly valuable. So a lot of different things.
I agree. So worth coming to GCV Monterey.
I think so. I think the hardest thing here, though, is like we just said, it is so big now. The hardest part is deciding how you're going to spend your time to deliver the most, value for you.
Yep.
And I think for me, it's about, how do you prioritize the time with the people you want to continue to build relationships with, people you want to establish new relationships with. And then there's always a ton of follow up after. So I like to use this as an initial touch point or just to check in with people, build a little rapport, and then there's always follow-ups after.
I'm glad you're spending 1 hour with us today. So, but it's interesting what you said, which is most of the challenges are going to be the same over time. Yet no CVCs are alike. They all have tweaks, and whether small or big. And you've gone through in your journey 3 different steps of corporate venturing,
Sure.
which again being different. Can you talk about that transition from your first experience to your second experience to the third, where you actually shaped it the way I think you felt was leveraging all the best practices from the past?
Sure. Well, again, I think you have to learn the organization and you have to kind of know, what the mandate is and then figure out a bit of the right structure to make that happen. I was really lucky when I came into SC Johnson, into that ventures group. It was still fairly new, but they had a very clear mandate of, how they wanted to invest, the type of, companies they were looking for. And that situation is actually very different than the other CVCs that I've been at. So it was specifically a pipeline for new opportunities to build new business units. And so very different deal structure, very different approach, different size or stage companies that you're looking at. But I got a really great fundamental understanding of how when a group, and it wasn't related to the core business, but this group had a mandate reporting directly into the office of the chairman of go find new opportunities because we want to grow in a certain way, and do that separately from the core businesses.
And
So
grow organically or inorganically or both?
inorganically,
Inorganically,
right?
okay.
So it's looking for, I mean, and it was like, hey, go find white space areas that, we can become new businesses. So now they have the lifestyle business units that has companies like Baby Organics, Method, like really great, lifestyle brands, like health and wellness focused brands. And the venture team has become a bit of a feeder for that, new brands to bring into that portfolio. So that, but some really smart people with respect to like deal structures, types of deals, what you should look for, how to build relationships with founders. So then when I moved to Tyson Ventures, there was actually a really great structure already set, a fundamental structure there. So I'm sure you know Reese Schroeder. He's, a bit of a legend in corporate VC. He'd already laid some really great groundwork. Like,
Yep.
absolutely. And so, I've told him many times, like, thank you for all that you taught me and a structure that you set that I've been able to really learn from. So stepping into that and then just fine tuning it, like based on what the organization's needs were. But a very different mandate, and that was minority investments that could end up in acquisition or could just be enabling technology. So really looking at a variety of opportunities. And so then when I came to Cargill, there was a basis set. The team was actually built out of a strategy project that said, hey, we're missing a lot of opportunity that's out there to source external innovation because, and I think rather brilliantly and humbly, we can't do this all ourselves. If we want to grow in a way that's going to deliver real value, we need to be open to that external ecosystem, and we need to build partnerships, build relationships, access technology that we don't have the capability or core competency to build ourselves. And so it's interesting though. I mean, it's a very large, highly matrixed organization with multiple enterprises. We have 6 different investment verticals over a wide variety of areas within food and ag. So I think I probably had an expectation of, I'm going to come in and this is where I want to be, right? But the organization's ability, like the education process that needs to happen, building a new function from scratch, it does take a lot of relationship building, trust building, planning, process implementation. So I say all the time, you kind of start out here, you have a goal of getting here, you start out here, but you slowly edge your way up to where you want to be. And it's a process. It does take time, but you want to be thoughtful about what those processes are and what the organization is like able to digest, able to understand, and willing to take the risk on. I mean, Cargill's been able to become wildly successful over the last 150 years by being incredibly driven by those commodity focused and then, kind of adding on to that, right? So starting in grain and then adding, protein ingredients that flow from the upstream commodity work to learn how we can be an early adopter. That's uncomfortable. And so I think just even having those conversations with, our venture board, who are all executives, getting them comfortable with a process that we put in place that says, yeah, well, we're not positive this is going to be successful.
So Erin, one thing you've mentioned is you have many business groups who have very different verticals. In one way, it's great because you have many more things you can look at, but at the same time, it's even more complex. How do you handle that?
It is a bit of a double-edged sword, but what I will say is that the organization is so excited about and focused on thinking about how to grow and how to stay relevant. I mean, a company doesn't exist and be successful for 150 years without adapting and growing, and that's a constant process. I think that's the same for, well, I mean, really anyone. I would say in the food and ag space especially, working at CPG companies, the only constant has been change. You have to adapt to like changing consumer needs, to changing regulatory environment, to changing, climate and environmental needs. There's just so many considerations. But it can be difficult because I think, especially for me personally, I'm the type of person that just wants to do all the things. I'm like, this is so exciting. We can do so much. But especially with a very small team with a global mandate, it can get to be overwhelming. And so we have to be, I think, very particular about declaring what our priorities are. And, we partner very closely with overall corporate strategy to say, okay, there are all these things we can do, but what should we be doing? And we have the conversation quite often with our venture board that it's just as important what we say no to than what we say yes to, because we're making conscientious choices about where we want to go and what's going to deliver the most value over time. So when you think about, as a great example, we have an investment vertical we call smart midstream and digital platforms. So things that fall into that are things like automated manufacturing, smart supply chain, digital customer platform. And then underneath each of those, there are a handful of priorities that we're looking at, and they're enabling technologies that are going to help our businesses, we think, as we implement them, become more efficient, be able to weather market changes, take out some of the variance that's related to labor, things of that nature that are really important to how we become more efficient, stay relevant, grow, supply chain traceability. People now want to know where their food's coming from,
Yep.
not just, hey, what supplier provided this, but all the way back to what farmer grew this. Where in the world did it come from? What's the carbon footprint of this? Like, that's the kind of information that customers and consumers are asking for. And so what are technologies we can ask to help deliver, find to help deliver against that ask? Being very specific about how we prioritize is really essential. Otherwise, out of 40 business units that all have, and that's not the exact number, but I'm just as an example.
Yeah.
If you have 40 business units that all have their own individual priorities, and you say those all rate the same at the corporate level, you'll never make any progress.
For sure.
So we've been really thoughtful about creating a construct for portfolio design where we've said not just where do we want to grow, but overlaying with that, what's the external market look like? So there could be areas where we want to grow, but there's just not a ton of external innovation happening. VC tends to be a bellwether for where the market's going. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So if there's a high concentration of companies startups trying to solve this problem and VC dollars flowing into that, that's probably an area where we should look at sourcing that external innovation or do some technology landscaping to say, hey, this is really, something that's of interest. So we overlay that with what our, corporate priorities are. And then another layer that we look at is, because we have to deliver strategic value, my team can help facilitate that, but it's really the businesses that have to be resourced and prioritize themselves in order to deliver that. Because if we say we're going to make this investment, but there's no connection to the resources in the core business, where's really, I think, the value in the partnership that we provide, then what's the value of doing an investment? What's the value of building a partnership when there's no resourcing to deliver
or demand?
That? Right.
There's so much to unpack here, and
I know I said a lot.
it's great. I mean, first, I like the way you're talking about strategy. I like to think about strategy as not just deciding where to go, but what not to do.
Correct.
And the prioritization, you've given quite a few good ideas about it. But one thing that I want to double click is, you may invest in something that's highly strategic, that could bring strategic value, but if there is no one in the mothership on the receiving end ready with the resources, you end up with actually a mismatch. How do you handle identification of the right time, and how do you handle when there's a mismatch? Because it will still happen however well prepared you are.
Right. Well, I think we're probably all living through that right now, just given what corporations are dealing with, given market conditions, really the lack of access to traditional VC dollars. I think it's no secret that there's been significantly less money raised by funds, traditional VC funds, or there were big investors that have literally just gotten out of VC.
Yep.
They've said hedge funds that were kind of dabbling in VC with really big checks have pulled out
Or
entirely.
returning money.
Right. So thinking about one opportunity that could provide, but also challenges that provides each of us has been something that, we're unpacking right now. There are companies in our portfolio that were highly strategic, or we thought, right, when the investments were made, but that's also part of uncovering what the learning is in what we do. Some of the investments we make have to be speculative. We say, hey, this could be a disruptor to our industry, or this is an emergent technology that we want to have a front seat to as it develops. And you're gathering learning during that time to make a decision of, is this an area we want to play in or not ultimately? And sometimes the answer is not. And at that point, what we've done is had some, very difficult conversations with our venture board about how we transition from this being less of a strategic delivery of value to a financial delivery, value delivery. So then that becomes more of, I would say, just tactical portfolio management at that point to deliver, a financial return on the investment versus trying to, build and deepen a partnership that would deliver, ultimate strategic value. We did get strategic value out of it, and it was the learning that said, hey, this is a place you don't want to go.
Which is again
right?
strategic.
Exactly. So I think, I'd be interested to understand, like, how do you attribute a value to learning? Like, how do you think about learning? Because I think there are a lot of differing views on value of learning when it comes to corporate venturing. So I'm curious how you think
it's
about
a timely question. So typically I don't take questions, but I will answer because last week we had our reflection week where everyone in TDK Ventures comes together and we look at the past 12 months, what we did well, what we could do better. And one of the things we have for the full team is the same set of team KPIs where we measure how much engagements, what we call equal win engagements, are happening between our corporation, TDK, and all the startups, whether we invested in or not. What we did not measure, which we plan to measure next year, is all the decisions for the corporations not to continue investing in a space from the learnings with engaging with startups. And that part, which I said earlier, strategy is about what you decide to do, but more importantly, what you decide not to do. We were not measuring that part. And that's what we plan to do in the next 12 months. So that's one of the improvements we are making at TDK Ventures.
Interesting.
So now back to you.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd say, well, that's helpful because we're, like I said, just a little past 3 years. So we're kind of getting to this inflection point that, when I came on board, I said, hey, we need 5 to 7 years in these investments to really prove out the value. But we're kind of hitting the leading edge now of some of the earlier investments that were made, or some legacy investments that were made before, out of the businesses before I arrived, and said, okay, well, we learned something, but I would argue that there is always value, financial value to learning, because it's not just delivering on what's successful and delivers strategic value, but there's a decision process that goes into saying, hey, this isn't a market segment that we want to enter. This isn't a product line that we want to launch because there's not a there, that we thought it was, or the financials don't work out in a way that we thought they would, or the regulatory environment is shifting in such a way that this becomes irrelevant. And I think you have to be able to articulate that to leadership in a way that translates it at least to some, financial metric. Because I will never forget, I had a CFO, a company that I worked for, look me right in the face and say, there's no value to learning. And I said, I actually disagree, because everything we're doing helps make a strategic decision that ultimately is in service of delivering value.
Oh, I would push back on the CFO, which is doing the wrong things, wasting money,
exactly,
is bad financial value.
Right.
And if you learn about things you shouldn't do, you're saving a lot. It's just you can't measure that saving,
Correct.
but you can estimate still that saving.
Right.
Now, I want to move to something very important, which I know you find very important too, which is building a team. Can you share maybe some tips to some of the audience who are thinking about starting a CVC, maybe from scratch, how did you shape the team? And maybe think about the first year versus the second year. How did you think about it?
Yeah. When I came in, it was a little bit of a blank slate. The way that the team is structured was, there was my role, which is the lead of the group, and then basically a group of peers, um, that are essentially investment managers that have responsibility for kind of the whole gamut from building a network and sourcing to the actual like deal doing, financial analyses to post investment portfolio management. So all the people on my team, including myself, are the ones that sit in the board seats that we have in companies we invest in. We look for observer seats for a variety of reasons, but everyone on my team has that role. So first of all, I think you need to look for really smart people. That's important. I will freely admit that I do not know everything. I will never know everything. That's why you have to have people on your team that you trust and that are smart enough and have either the experience or the ability to learn quickly the fundamentals that are needed to do what we do. And then another component to that, so other than just being really smart, driven people, is that I think you need people who are willing to learn and people who are hungry to continue to grow. Because I think the only thing, again, that's constant in what we do is that it's always changing.
Yep.
You're always going to be learning something new. You're always going to be engaging with new technologies, with people that are way smarter than I will ever be. And so being able to be humble and say, hey, I don't know about this. What can I learn? What's out there that can make me smarter? What are we not seeing that we should be seeing? I think is really, really important. I'll also freely admit that when our team was structured, we didn't put a lot of thought towards career pathing. So that's something that we're working on now because you can't attract really smart, really driven people and say, well, this is just the same thing you're going to do forever. What's next for you? What experiences you want? What professional development can we get you? So going to training like GCB Institute has, so that continual learning process. I'm continually learning. I want my team to be continually learning too. So thinking about that. And then I think there's this really interesting blend that you need to have. I think it's very difficult to build a team of complete outsiders to have success in an organization, especially one that's so relationship driven and highly matrixed, like a big organization like Cargill is. So having a blend of people that have been at the organization for some period of time, so they understand both the formal and informal power structures. They understand who the allies in the organization are for the work that we're trying to do. And so it can help be a little bit of, I'll call it a pathfinder in the organization, and can help educate maybe the people that are coming from outside on who the right people are to know, how to build those relationships, and then just understanding how the business works. And then also having a blend of people that are coming from the outside that maybe have other fund experience, have startup experience. So I think having, a blend of those experiences and diversity. Diversity is really, really important to me. Diversity of background, diversity of thought, diversity of geography. I have an incredibly diverse team, and that's by design. We're actually majority women.
Congratulations.
We have representation on nearly every continent from, birth origin and also now positioning where people on my team are based, where they live and work. And it does lead to sometimes some very critical conversations. I like a little bit of conflict because I think in those differing views that the team brings to bear, that's where you're going to get the most value. So everybody that looks the same, thinks the same, operates the same, you're not going to get the best results.
You're getting one brain.
Exactly. So I really like being challenged by my team. I really like having conversation and having a trusting relationship where people can say to me, I don't think we're doing this right. Or actually, I've seen this happening in the market. We should probably respond this way. Instinctually, I think people want to get defensive and say, no, that's wrong. But I'm trying very hard to set aside like my own personal biases or, maybe ways that I've seen things done in the past to make way for very smart people on my team to say, no, no, there is more opportunity. Like, let me help you understand that. Let's structure the team in a way or approach this in a way that helps us unlock something that we've not been open to before. So yes, team design is very important, and it's just so multifaceted and complicated. And I'm still learning, right? I don't think
It
you ever have the answers.
forever.
It's a constant evolution, learning, testing process to build a successful team.
That's amazing. And I love the blend part, the diversity, getting pathfinders from inside the organization. And I think what you've described with the conflict and trust is actually fitting the framework of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is a book by Lencioni,
Yeah.
which says that if you have lack of trust, then you're going to have lack of conflict, which means you have a lack of commitment, and then you have no accountability, and therefore you don't have results.
Right.
But most people don't get the lack of trust, which is not that I'm trusting you. I'm trusting the team enough to share my doubts, my vulnerability, my mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, then you can go into healthy conflict.
Right.
So I really like the way you've described it.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's a learning process. Actually, I just had everyone on my team, including myself, take a little mini course at Booth on team effectiveness.
Okay.
So we're going to have a workshop next month on the the five
The function of a team.
right, and we're going to talk about that. So everyone's going to do a little bit of a survey. We're going to identify, what our opportunity areas are. Because again, I think it's a constant process, right? You're always learning, always evolving, and I don't ever think you're 100% set in what you're doing. And if you think you are, then you're probably doing it wrong.
Very, very likely. So actually, maybe a tip for the audience. This book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, has also a survey online, which is you pay for, but allows you to see what in your, especially your core team or your management team, what are the places where you are not doing so well and where you're doing well, but also in the questions, how much variance there is. People who believe we're doing extremely well, while some people think we're doing very poorly.
Right.
It's all anonymous, but it allows you to have a sense of where can we improve. And we did that survey a year ago, and now we are building the team, so it's not the time to actually do it again, but probably next year, when we have matured the team more, we will probably do it again. So
I'd be curious to hear how it progressed. I'll have to check in with you after you do it the next time and see how that's progressed, because I think that disparity in opinions, like you want to try to obviously close that gap or understand what's driving those differences. And I think especially in the teams in CVC that we run, in most cases, they're very lean. We have to be high performing and, as effective and communicative about both what our successes and failures are in order to improve. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to actually hear about how that evolves for your team over time too.
Very nice. So you talked about career and training, and this is a journey for all of us, but how do you think about career progression inside a corporate VC?
How do you think about
the career progression?
Oh.
My French accent.
That's a great that's a great question. Gosh, and I think it varies again so widely by CVCs. Like if you look at some of the more mature CVCs that have a much larger team, I think it's more obvious what that path looks like for people within that organization. But I like to think of, CVC as a function across different organizations. Obviously, it's no secret I've been at different organizations doing this because I think maybe that core skill set and perspective can be translatable to other organizations.
Yeah.
But, I like to think of, my team as a skills and a career builder, both for the organization, so people that want to stay within Cargill, which selfishly I would love to see everyone do, but also people that are really passionate about doing investing and innovation. They may not be able to find another place within the organization that's going to give them that same exposure and experience. So I think you also have to be willing to understand that I want people on my team to be very clear about what their career goals are. I want to help them find the professional development opportunities that are going to build out that experience for them. and also recognize full well that they probably will go out into the world and do other things. So sometimes I think thinking about the career progression just within your organization is the wrong way to look at it. I do want people, and I've seen this in, people that have worked for me over the years in other organizations, in other functions, in other roles, go and be successful in other places, but that keeps expanding your network. So I think about it in a way that it's about making sure that people are supported and build their skills and can become successful no matter where they want to go. I think that's, at least for me, when I think about professional development and career progression, something that's really important. And I fully recognize that that may not be in my organization forever, and that's okay. But it helps build the network. It helps build trust with other organizations, and it gets great people doing this, at other places that you already have a really strong relationship with. So there's career progression within the organization, and then there's career progression outside of the organization. And I think they're both important. And it's important to have, again, a trusting, open relationship with your team so they can communicate what their goals are, and you can help them, as a manager and as a leader, to check those boxes that they want to. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to have to do things they don't find excitement and joy and fulfillment
Let's
from.
touch on that.
There's a balance. So, yeah.
I think what we do is really exciting. There are so many things that makes it a dream job, but there's also a lot of things we have to do which are not so enjoyable. And finding the right balance is, of course, very important. There's something else you're very intentional, which is bringing strategic value. And maybe you can talk about how you have built the decision-making inside Cargill and your own organization to ensure earlier strategic value. And you talked about communication. How do you make it visible?
So that's always the challenge. And, we are in the situation, like I said, but now, we're entering our 4th year of doing this. We're kind of starting to hit the leading edge of where strategies are evolving. There are things in our portfolio where we said, hey, that isn't a place that we want to play, or we've learned what we want to and said, like, that's not a priority for us anymore, which is, that's a difficult conversation to have, but I think it's expected. As strategies evolve and change, you decide where you can get, the most value, where you really want to grow. And so thinking about, like I said, how you build a partnership and relationship with corporate strategy, so that you are aligned with the organization's goals and where you're looking, is really fundamental and important. We have built, and we're learning now that we need to actually be a bit more rigorous in this process. A list of who the primary points of contact are on the commercial side of the relationship. So, my team manages the equity investment and the relationship with management teams, but, we're a bit of a connector on the commercial side to help deliver that strategic value. But what we haven't been, I think, as strict on is saying, okay, commercial partner, you did present the strategic rationale to the venture board, which is a step in the process we added that I actually feel really good about, because it does put the onus on those business management teams to say, yes, this is important to us. Yes, it's strategically relevant, and here's why. So they have to talk about how they want to grow, what strategic value this is going to deliver, what the addressable market is, ultimately what they want to get from it. But what I'm finding that we need to be, I would say, more granular and tactical about is, what are those milestones and how do you drive more accountability and visibility around delivering on those? I think we have we're building very good communication, with those commercial teams that have to deliver on the strategic value, because frankly, our team doesn't have the size, bandwidth, or the depth of knowledge on the operational side.
It's a
partnership. Or the resources, right, to deliver that ultimate strategic value. So if someone in a portfolio company comes to me and says, hey, I really need help on, regulatory resources on this thing, or hey, we're scaling and I need someone who's an expert in operations or supply chain. I can offer you a little advice, but I'm not the expert. So I'll reach into the business and say, or, people on my team will make that connection and broker those conversations and those resources for the partnership. But yeah, it's a challenge. I think it's a constant challenge. And, putting regular check-ins in place so that you stay a bit closer to the commercial side, so you understand how things are progressing or if they're not, and how you provide that feedback to both the portfolio company and to the business teams has become even more critical as we get to some of these decision points with companies that are starting to scale or that we're implementing their technology. So I think it's just a constant process. So part of our goal over the next couple of years about communication, both internally and externally, is to be more visible. Been a little bit in stealth mode, I'll say, because we've been really focused on making sure that we have the right investment theses and we're prioritizing properly. We have alignment and support from the venture board. We're connected to corporate strategy. It's all just a
Yep.
big kind of interconnected matrix, a bit of a spider web, right? You pull on one part of it, something else moves. You got to kind of continually manage
Yep.
that and keep a bird's eye view of it. So we're learning as we go. I wouldn't say that we have it figured out by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think us being more visible externally is something that I want to do more of. Because I think if you communicate what it is that you're looking for more clearly to the external environment, it makes it much easier for you to get good inbound and for your network to bring you relevant opportunities as
So something you mentioned, which I think is an amazing practice, is you get, and we'll talk about the venture board, but something you mentioned is you're getting the groups inside the mothership pitching why they think an investment would bring strategic value, which is not just getting buy-in, but actually commitment. And you're talking about, of course, the difficulty to track that commitment over time, but how did you think of it, and how do you enforce this kind of best practices of getting these groups stating publicly, in a way, their commitment for strategic value?
So that is a challenge. What I'd say is we're implementing some newer processes, or like leaning into areas where we had, I would say, like maybe looser visibility and accountability. So a great resource that I don't think we've fully leveraged, and we're working to increase communication and have the enterprise strategy leads really help us with continual prioritization. So saying, hey, here are all the things in your portfolio. I mean, I just sat down with the enterprise strategy lead of our food and bio enterprise the other day, and we just walked through, like, here are all the things in the portfolio that have connection to your enterprise. This is the person that's tagged to it. Here's the progress that's being seen. What's your perspective? Like, what are your, latest priorities? Because there's been a lot of reorganization. There's been a lot of, not just physical restructuring, but also reshuffling of priorities or learning more about areas where we say, okay, there is more opportunity here versus this other area. So I think having more continual check-ins and conversations with those people that have purview over the whole, because there's 4 enterprises at Cargill. So having purview over that entire enterprise and the relative priorities, they can help us. And, I've thought of it more of like an inform, but actually it's more of a partnership and saying, hey, I need some help, right? I need some help in prioritizing. I need some help in getting the resourcing. Hey, this person was the tag, but I know they just changed roles. Like, can you help me identify who that next sponsor
That
is?
happens a lot.
Right, exactly. And so I think leveraging those people that already have a lot of influence and visibility in the organization is something that's going to continue to be really critical for us to build success.
Very nice. Now I want to think about the entrepreneurs who are going to watch this interview. And that's going to be my last question to wrap up the interview.
Sure.
What it is you're excited to invest next?
Oh, there's so much. I think, again, right, that's the challenge. There's so many just amazing things happening out there. So I think enabling technologies is something that we're leaning into a bit more. And you're like, what does that mean? So we're identifying that. But So for me, those are technologies that actually stretch across enterprises. So it's not just, okay, this is relevant for the protein and salt enterprise. This is relevant for food and bio or ag supply chain or animal nutrition and health. What are some of the core enabling technologies that actually can stretch across multiple of those and become a platform that deliver value for the organization? So a great example of that is, everyone's saying precision fermentation. But what does that mean? That means using fermentation in a way that delivers differentiated products or ingredients to our customers. So in the space of meat and dairy alternatives, in the space of starches and sweeteners and texturizers, in the space of animal nutrition. So from feed additives or feed, there's just so many things that is a capability or platform can deliver capability and value to the organization that I'm really excited about work we're doing there. And then, I feel like it doesn't sound as exciting to people as I think that it is, but in automated manufacturing and smart supply chain, there are a lot of really, really interesting technologies that I think are going to help us stay relevant and become more efficient in the work that we do and be able to deliver on customer asks and expectations with respect to things like traceability from source to consumers' plates. Some really great technologies in that space that I'm excited for us to continue to investigate, invest in, partner with. And what I say from an entrepreneur perspective is, we look across a lot of things in food and ag, but I think one of the big values that our group brings to the organization isn't just the investments that we make, but it's being connectors. So we do have visibility to priorities across the organization, but also key business leaders and strategy leaders that, hey, we might not make an investment in your company, but there could be a great partnership there. Is there a joint development agreement? Is there a supply agreement? Is there an offtake agreement? And there's so many ways that we can do business that isn't necessarily tied to an equity investment, but we can traffic direct a little bit, right? Make those introductions or get people to the right folks in the organization to have meaningful conversations about becoming partners on the commercial side.
There are many ways to add value.
Right.
Erin, thank you so much for your time today and being so candid and sharing your journey and all the best practices along the way.
Thank you so much for the time, Nicolas. This has been really great. And like I'd say, again, we don't have it all figured out. I think we're learning as we go, but the ability to be adaptive, be able to, create some direction in undefined or chaotic environments, that's the value that I think we're bringing to our organizations, and we'll continue to grow and learn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
time.